I am actually the only person still alive today who has led the Conservative Party on being ejected from government at the beginning of a period of opposition. And so I have to tell them this is not a satisfying experience. It's not how you want to spend a large part of your professional lifetime. So they might be thinking about it, but most of them can't remember it or have never known it. And it's much tougher, and there's no guarantee of ever coming back. You know, the Conservatives have come back every time in the past for 200 years, but no guarantee. Politics will change a lot over the next 20, 30 years. The world will change a lot, and you're just stepping off that change in the world and becoming a spectator at a crucial time if you go into opposition.
Now, William, this is an absolute shower and a shambles, isn't it? However you cut it, it's a total shambles.
Well, some of the, a bit of the Conservative Party is, yes. And that's what I've written about in the Times today, saying if they keep behaving like that, they've only got opposition to look forward to. That is what they're heading for if they make it difficult or impossible to run the government, you know, for yet another Conservative prime minister. So I think they need to be warned about that. Having said that, the vast majority of the Conservative MPs will vote for the legislation, even if they have some doubts about it. You know, they're very supportive of Rishi Sunak. So that the vast majority I wouldn't criticize, but there are too many people trying to pick holes in it when really they have to pull together, they have to stick together to have the slightest chance of Conservatives doing well in elections next year.
You're a big supporter of Rishi Sunak, of course, but I just wonder whether you might concede, William, that this becoming the hill to die on, this becoming the issue which absolutely animates the divisions that have always existed in the Tory party, it may well not work. If it does work, it won't make much difference. And yet this has become the totemic issue of his government. That looks like poor political handling. Even if you think he's right, the fact this has become, the stakes have been raised so much on this particular issue feels like mismanagement. Do you think that's true?
No, not really. No, I understand the point. It's a fair point, but I think actually it's more a problem of the Conservative Party than of the leadership of the Conservative Party. This is a very important issue to deal with on its own merits and also ahead of any general election. Any prime minister has to show migration is under control. If there was a change of government, they would have exactly the same problem. And this is part of doing this. I think that it's not difficult at all for the Conservative Party to unite behind a rational position. It shouldn't be. So I don't think that's poor leadership. If you take away the whole Rwanda policy, well, then you have no disincentive, to use that word, for illegal migration. So that would be a very serious hole in the policy. That's why it's become so important. So no, I think Rishi Sunak's been doing a whole range of things. You know, he's greatly improved relations with Europe, solved the Northern Ireland Protocol problem, had the global summit on artificial intelligence, stabilized financial markets. Now there is modest tax reductions coming along. So he's been doing many things. You don't really pick as the leader which one of the things you're doing people are going to start objecting to. You're getting on with them all. And that's what he's been doing.
Kezia Dugdale, we've been talking a lot today about all the different factions within the Conservative Party. Are there too many of them, or actually is that just politics? I'm trying not to use the cliche, you know, the one I'm talking about. But is that going to be the undoing of yet another Conservative Prime Minister?
It's definitely the byproduct of a political party in its dying days to think that it has time to devote to these mini internal tribal wars. If they were in a position of power and thought they had a good chance of winning the next general election, there would be party discipline and none of this would be happening. I actually think today is a huge day in the context of what happens at the next general election. If Rishi Sunak is able to get the bill through in his preferred form today, then he has a fighting chance of once again resetting his administration and getting back onto the front foot on the issues that he wants to talk about. If he makes too many concessions to the right of his party today, then we know how this steps out, and it steps out in the form of further defeats, either in the Commons or in the Lords, and months ahead of wrangles in the chamber over the Rwanda plan that will just remind the public how much disarray the party is in and reinforce the need for an alternative. I still believe that the vast, vast majority of people go into politics with good intent because they want to improve their country and bring forward good ideas and put them into practice for all the issues that they care about. Although you can do some of that from opposition, you really can only achieve a great deal from a position of power. And you have to win that power. You have to build a majority of people in the country who share your view and hope for the future. Now, I spent my entire political career in opposition. I arrived in Parliament in opposition and I left it in opposition. And all I ever wanted to do was to win elections, to have the opportunity to serve from a position of government. So the people who have that power should look after it so carefully and so gingerly, because they're beginning to look like they don't really appreciate what they've got.
William, you say that they're not going to like it if they end up in opposition, because people won't be kind of taking down on their mobile phones or their notebooks what they're saying and kind of breathlessly waiting on every word anymore. But presumably a lot of Tory MPs, Conservative MPs, must have this in their mind now.
Well, they said if this vote goes wrong for them tonight, they better all have it in their minds. Yeah, there will be, of course, with polls showing the Labour Party well ahead in the election, they will be thinking about that. But remember, if they go into opposition, a lot of them won't be there at all because they would have lost their seats along the way. And I think, I point out in my column, I am actually the only person still alive today who has led the Conservative Party on being ejected from government at the beginning of a period of opposition. And so I have to tell them this is not a satisfying experience. It's not how you want to spend a large part of your professional lifetime. So they might be thinking about it, but most of them can't remember it or have never known it. And it's much tougher. And there's no guarantee of ever coming back. You know, the Conservatives have come back every time in the past for 200 years, but no guarantee. Politics will change a lot over the next 20, 30 years. The world will change a lot. And you're just stepping off that change in the world and becoming a spectator at a crucial time if you go into opposition.
That's an interesting point. You're saying that the Conservatives could, I suppose, get such a kicking that they don't return. They don't return in that form.
Well, there is no guarantee of coming back. You know, it's I'm not predicting that because, you know, I want Rishi Sunak to win his vote, to keep doing well over the coming year, to win an election. So I'm not predicting that will happen. I'm just saying it can happen. You know, the Liberal Party used to be a regular governing party, but when it went out after the First World War, it actually never came back in again as a majority government. It's only ever come back in coalitions. So sometimes the political landscape changes. And that happens if you slip out of government with a bad reputation. That can happen. So I think that would be a very serious situation for the Conservative Party if it lost the next election. They need to pull themselves together, including at 7 o'clock today. Kezia is right. Actually, I completely agree. This is a really important day in British politics. That is an important pointer to the next general election.
And we can all agree that the Conservative Party is a large cathedral. It's a huge temple.
It's several cathedrals at the moment.
Well, yeah, and it needs to be worn by 7 o'clock this evening.
And was it this broad in your day, William?
Not quite as broad, but difficult. You know, it had got very divided over, guess what?
Europe.
In 1997. Part of my job for the first year really was trying to straighten out that divide and end up with a clear policy on Europe and the euro. But there were resignations along the way. There were people telling me that was impossible, that I'd never get everybody to agree to it. So it wasn't quite this bad, because now we've had several prime ministers have been overthrown. The whole Brexit saga has got some people used to the idea that They pronounce on every bit of their principles on every single bill. Where there is a principle that you have to give people a choice at an election of a cohesive political party, and that's the principle they need to adhere to now.
7 o'clock. So Stephen Swinford, who is the political editor of The Times, has been tweeting about the content of that breakfast meeting. It was an hour long. He said he will not pull the bill. Guess what? There was a robust and frank exchange of views to a broad church. Doesn't say that. He said he would consider amendments if they were within the framework of the legislation. Around half of the rebels want to wreck the bill by voting it down, and half to abstain or back it. How many is that then?
Well, if we think
Half
it's about
of 40.
Yeah. And that would mean
That would be okay. He would get through.
Yeah, 20 votes against, 20 abstain, he gets it through. But how badly is he wounded as a result of
Well,
that?
exactly. At one point, the conversation veered into discussion about tax cuts and the shape of government. That's quite the veer. And I'm sure you all want to know, because I kept saying it was croissants. There were bacon sandwiches and there were pastries on the menu. So something for everyone, catering for both sides.
Yeah. William, what do you make of that as a report? But does that make you more or less worried that this will get through?
A little bit encouraged that it will get, but you really can't tell from that sort of kind. And there were like three halves there, weren't there?
Were there? Oh, sorry.
Steve Swinford is the top political reporter in the country, but there were three halves there of people who were going to vote for and vote against and abstain. So I'm not sure we're any the wiser, is my honest analysis of that.
That's probably true.
I just feel happy that I know what they ate.
Yeah.
It was worrying me. Right, let's move on now. In a way, on this day 4 years ago, we were heading to the polls to see if Jeremy Corbyn would defy all our expectations and become Prime Minister, but he didn't. And of course, his Brexit secretary, publicly supportive, was one Sir Keir Starmer. Fast forward 4 years, and Starmer is now in the driving seat and has booted out his old boss from the party, despite pitching himself during the Labour leadership race as not being a stark break from the Corbyn agenda. Bridget Phillipson was on the programme earlier and said that Starmer is not just saying one thing to members and another to voters.
Well, an awful lot has changed in that time. You mentioned the European Union. We've since left the European Union. We had a global pandemic, the kind of which, once in 100 years event that completely changed so much of how we live our lives, both in the short term and the long term, and has had serious and lasting consequences for many parts of our society, not least children. So, of course, you have to respond and reflect to the changes that you see around you. And, of course, the other thing that has happened since then is that the Tories crashed the economy with that disastrous mini-budget.
Kezia Dugdale, we'll talk about policy in a second, but is it possible within the space of 4 years to go from being Jeremy Corbyn's Brexit secretary, publicly supportive of him, to saying, well, we don't want any of that, and just drawing a line between himself and Jeremy Corbyn? Is that a clean line, do you think?
I think it is, yes, and he's had to work very, very hard to do that. He's had a sort of 3-point plan in terms of how to win the next general election, and the first part of that was to move on from the Corbyn era, to stabilise the party and to get rid of any remnants of the troubles of what cost Labour the last two general elections before that. It's taken him the best part of 4 years to do that, and he's definitely achieved it. Look, Keir Starmer is a pragmatist and a realist, and he's utterly determined to win the next election. I don't love a lot of what he says and argues at the moment, but I understand that he is making these points because he wants to win. And the things I want him to do come from the luxurious position of purity, I guess. So, I wish him extremely well in terms of walking that tightrope. My big fear, though, has always been not a Conservative resurgence under a different party leader being the threat to his electoral prospects, but that turnout might ruin it. He's got to give people enough hope, enough of an alternative to come out and vote for Labour. It's not enough right now just to tell everyone that it's going to be very difficult and the spending tax won't come on for a long time. That people need to hear a bit more than that, and there's some key decisions ahead, I think, that will define whether that's going to happen.
Do you think it's a problem that it feels a little bit like he's had to recently define himself in the context of other people. I'm not like Jeremy Corbyn. I'm distancing myself from him. Oh, Thatcher, she was good. Does that matter?
I don't really know what he's trying to do. I didn't understand the Thatcher intervention at all, other than he clearly wants to speak to Conservative voters. He knows the mechanism to do that is through the Telegraph newspaper, and that by trying to find some good in what Thatcher represented, he can try and land a message with those groups. I think it felt a little naive to me, because it's cost him a huge backlash in terms of the majority of the centre and centre left within the Labour Party and across the trade union movement, who are now looking at him with a tilted head going, who are you and what do you stand for? Which is why people need to hear an awful lot more about what Labour are going to do from power. So, of course, he's going to make a big speech today. We'll probably hear very little of it because of what's happening around Rwanda. That suits him to an extent, because why interrupt your opponents when they're making mistakes? But he's going to have to carve out some space soon to reassure people the length and breadth of the country that life will get better with Labour. And I need to hear a bit more of that too.
William, it strikes me, though, that maybe what he's done is a lesson for what the Conservative Party has failed to do, because he's picked the unpopular wing, the extreme wing of the party, and he's booted it out. And he's got enough people hungry enough for power that even with, as Kezia said, they might tilt their head, they might disagree with them on Israel and Palestine, they might disagree with them on Margaret Thatcher or on not nationalising the water companies or whatever it might be, but they feel hungry for power and they don't want to be in opposition. And maybe that's in some ways, Starmer represents the mirror opposite of where Rishi Sunak finds himself.
Yes, I think there is that hunger, absolutely, and that's why a lot of people in the Labour Party will put up with things that they're not very enthusiastic about and they're not sure about, and they will be worried that Keir Starmer is actually accepting all the Conservative spending plans and most of the tax plans, and won't have that much room for manoeuvre if he did win an election. But absolutely, they have got that hunger, and that is one of the necessary things to win an election. But I'm not sure he knows really what he stands for. I think he knows he's not Jeremy Corbyn, even though he did support him last time. But I'm not sure he really knows what he would do 6 months into government, when it's all very difficult and there are strikes and he hasn't got the money that he thought he might, hope to have in government to throw around. What is he then going to turn into? Is he like Margaret Thatcher? That seems rather unlikely. Or is he an associate? Is he more in the Corbyn direction? We don't know, and I'm not sure he knows. And I think that's why these speeches, like the one he's giving, all turn out to be rather unsatisfying, because he doesn't really know himself.
But just simply not being the current government might be enough, and that's the thing that could stand in his favour, whatever happens and whatever he says. Let's move on to an issue, because there's a great column in the paper today, as well as yours, William, by Hugo Rifkin. And I don't know if you saw Diana Rigg at the weekend. The late actress, she spoke about her desire to die with all the power that marked out her wonderful work. She talks about the dignity of dying, sick of the humiliation of her final days. And Hugo has written a beautiful piece in the Times that she makes an unanswerable case, and yet he argues that making an assisted dying law needs thinking through. It would change the way we thought about death, and it would have consequences we might not want. And he writes beautifully about his own mum, who was determined to live despite her great pain. She wouldn't want to give up the greatest gift, which is, of course, being alive. Kezia, it feels to me we're heading towards a country in which assisted dying is going to happen. Do you think and Hugo raises some very crucial points, but it does feel that the direction is pointing in one way?
It does, and at a very slow pace, and that's to be welcomed, because this is a huge change to how we think about life and death. I personally support this move. I had a very difficult time in Parliament when it first came up in Scotland, because I signed the private members bill for assisted dying when Margot MacDonald, the independent MSP, first advocated it. And then when I became leader of the Labour Party, I ended up voting against it because it was proving so controversial and causing such divisions in the country and in political parties in general. And I really deeply regret that now, because I've seen and heard of so many people have a horrible death. I think we've got the right balance in society now, the right medical and clinical support to ensure that people can live well with life-limiting conditions for a very long time. But I think we're still getting death badly wrong, and that we have a right to a good death, and that it's possible through legislation to have enough safety mechanisms and checks and balances in place to ensure that people have the autonomy to determine what a good death looks like for themselves. So I think this legislation is long overdue. I think there's now support for it in the Scottish Parliament, but as ever, public opinion seems to be ahead of the politicians on this. So it's definitely going to happen. I think it'll happen within 10 years. I'm not sure it'll happen much more speedily than that, I'm afraid.
William, it's not traditionally a Conservative idea, perhaps, assisted dying, but what do you make of it?
Well, there will be people on both sides of the argument in the Conservative Party, as in most parties. And I think I've moved on this over the years. I was against it, when I voted on it decades ago in the House of Commons because of fear about how it might be misused. I think now, yes, I've moved with that, perhaps that majority in the country. I would like to find a way of making an assisted dying law work. But Hugo Rifkin's article, as you mentioned, is a really thoughtful, excellent article, which just points out that it's not simple making that work. So it actually needs a few more years of debate to frame a law correctly on this, I think, and wisely.
Of course, there's people though who are in that position and who are heading towards it, who want something done about it as soon as possible. But it is a debate we've been having for a long time. It'll be interesting to see where it goes. Make sure you read that column in the paper. There's also a letter in the Times from a woman about her mother starved for 5 weeks before she died, as opposed to being given a quicker, more dignified death. I mean, these are the actual things that are happening, the terms that we have to speak about in terms of people who are going through this.